Picture this. You're a photographer who has been finding yourself tending towards a more analog life. Mechanical watches instead of your phone. Books instead of your iPad. Maybe even in the way you take notes. With an actual pen and paper rather than the Notes app. But when it comes to your photography, you just can't get the feel that you're looking for. You've tried everything at this point, except for shooting actual film. Lightroom presets, tone curves, adding more grain than is healthy in Lightroom, custom picture profiles, you name it. But nothing has quite gotten you to where you want to go. You've even picked up a 20-year-old DSLR, and that got you pretty close, but not close enough. You're not satisfied yet. Your photography isn't setting your soul on fire. Not yet. People tell you all the time, oh, well, if you're just after that analog feel and look, just shoot actual film. But you can't. See, film is popular again. It's absurdly expensive to purchase and develop over time, and many film SLR cameras have gotten so expensive that digital is often cheaper. Or you're like me and you have a few rolls of film and a film camera, but the camera is broken and you can't afford to fix it. All of this leaves you feeling frustrated, creatively stuck, plateaued. You're searching for something that's old and yet new. Something that feels like it will breathe new life into your work and cure your creative boredom. This is how I've felt for quite a while. But guys, I think I finally found it. Or rather, it found me. Today's video is brought to you by the fine folks over at Dehancer. Now I know what you're thinking, whoa! Sponsored video! And I must let you know, Dehancer has given me access to their plugins for Lightroom and Photoshop for free, and they've also given me access to the affiliate program. However, they are not directly paying me for this video. They do not get to watch it before it goes live, and all opinions are my own. So with that out of the way, let me show you what they've got, because it's pretty freaking cool. This is, let me tell you, the most accurate and realistic film stock emulations I think I've ever seen. Like, I'm really surprised. It's not all sunshine and rainbows. There are a couple of things that I really don't like, but for the majority of the application that I would have for something like this, and I think a lot of other people in the photography community would have for something like this, this is fantastic. This could be a good alternative to film photography for those of us who want to be able to get that film look in our images but don't have lots of money over time to pour into buying film, buying cameras, maintaining those cameras, repairing those cameras, developing film, and what have you. And so I thought this could provide a lot of value. So of course I went, yes, I would love to take a look at this. Again, I will be showcasing the plugins for Lightroom. So here we are in Lightroom. This is a portrait shoot that I did a few days back. I feel like these would be some great photos to show you just exactly how awesome Dehancer is. Now, when you pick up the Dehancer plugin, they send documentation that walks you through the entire installation process and how to set it up to work seamlessly with Lightroom, which is really great, and I would recommend you go through and follow that for sure. The way I have this currently set up is I have my raw image here. There's been no edits done to it. Now, in the documentation that Dehancer provides with the plugin, they recommend setting your photos up in a certain way in order to get the best possible color representation or color reproduction and the most accurate looks out of these film stock emulations. So I've made a preset here called that I call Dehancer Prep, which has all of the settings set to what they recommend in the documentation for a good starting place with a raw file. So that's, you know, exposure down 1 stop, contrast -40, blacks +60, sharpening all the way off, no denoise or anything like that. Right click on it and you hit edit in Dehancer Lightroom plugin. It will edit a copy with those Lightroom adjustments, and then bam, we're now in Dehancer. I like to walk you through my use case of this so that you can see exactly what it's like to use something like this and make an informed decision for yourself. One of the things that kind of bugs me a little bit is when I am editing a photo and I've edited it in Dehancer and finished it, exported it out, every time I bring in a new image, it uses the same settings that I used on the last image, which doesn't sound like an annoying thing. That sounds like it could be good, but that doesn't always work. And so I find myself having to come up here and resetting all the settings back to defaults and starting from scratch, which is a little annoying to do for each individual image. But it's not the end of the world. It's just a minor annoyance. So over here on the left, you have film profile. If I check this box to enable it, I now have access to all of these different film stocks. And I have some that I've favorited because I really like the look. For those of you who are not familiar with film at all, when you go through this list, this doesn't apply to all of these, but when you go through these film stocks in this list, you'll notice that some of them are labeled, like for example this, CineStill 50D, and right next to it, CineStill 800T. The 800 is the ISO speed, or ASA speed as it used to be called, and then the D signifies a daylight white balance. So this is white balanced for daylight conditions, like a 5600 Kelvin. The T is tungsten white balance, so it's going to be colder, a little bluer, so you're going to balance that to around 3200 Kelvin. I have some that I have favorited, and if there's any in here that as you're going through you like, you can always just click the little heart button up here at the top. Now, one thing that's really fun is you can break this into all kinds of films. There's color negative films, there's motion picture films, there's some really fun ones in motion picture, like Kodak Vision 3, color positive films, black and white, instant, exotic, and cross type films. There is a whole bunch of options here. I found myself enjoying lately a lot of the color negative films, and I'm going to demonstrate some of my favorites. For example, this is a portrait photo, and I feel like Kodak Portra 400 or 800 could work with this really well. I like Kodak Portra 800, so I'm going to select that one. Now over here on the right, you have a panel that's broken down into a number of sections that allow you to control the different aspects of the film emulation. And this is very, very similar to the traditional chemical development process of actual 35mm film. So it's very close. It's essentially the digital development version of the chemical development, and a lot of the steps are exactly the same. In source, we have exposure compensation, temperature compensation, tint, defringe, and defringe radius. I have never touched the defringe settings. I'm not 100% sure exactly what that does. I've never messed with them. If I play around with them more and I discover something cool, I'll update you. But I haven't really played around with those. The exposure compensation is nice because if you bring your image in and you're like, oh, it's a little too dark or a little too bright, you can always change that. So I'm gonna brighten this image up a little bit. Temperature compensation does exactly what you think. You slide it to the right, it gets warmer. You slide it to the left, it gets cooler. I think the way it was shot already looks fine to me. Next, film developer. We're going to enable this. Contrast boost does exactly what you think it does. It boosts, like it raises or lowers your contrast ratio. Gamma correction, I haven't figured out. In a lot of these images that I've played with, it seems to just adjust basically exposure. Color separation and color boost. Color separation, I don't know what it does. I've been sliding this back and forth on all kinds of photos and I haven't noticed a difference. Color boost, exactly what you think it is. It's saturation. Generally, I don't play with this too much because I want the film stock to speak for itself. I don't necessarily want to boost it too much, so I'm just gonna maybe pump that a little bit and then just leave it. Film compression. This is essentially a dynamic range option. You have your tonal range where, depending on how that gets adjusted, essentially affects the dynamic range in your highlights and shadows. It can be an excellent way to control areas in your photo if your highlights are a little hot or your shadows are a little bit low. You can slide this around to increase or reduce essentially the dynamic range in your image, which is great. I don't play around with this too much. Expand. Expand is essentially like a broken down version of a contrast slider. Your black point, if you slide it to the right, your blacks get blacker, darker. Yeah, words. You slide it to the left, it essentially brings your blacks up. The white point does the same thing, but for the light parts of your image. So I'm gonna make some really quick adjustments there. Print. Now print is very interesting. Under profile, you have a few options here. Most of the time I leave this on Kodak Endura glossy paper, because if I was printing an image, you know, like in a small, like 5x7, that is most likely what I'd do. You can change your exposure here like it would in the print stage. You can change the exposure of the print, the tonal contrast, color density. I don't really mess around too much with tonal contrast or color density. I like having things very, very close to how I originally shot them. Saturation is exactly what you think it is. It's saturation. Pull that all the way to the left, you're gonna get a black and white. Color head. Color head is interesting because with the color head, it's very similar to the development process, again, of actual analog 35mm film. In the machines, there's 3 heads that the film gets run through, and they apply either yellow and blue, magenta and green, or cyan and red. And you can use these to further play around with, in digital terms, basically, the tinting of your image. So in these, I think I'm going to take the yellow and blue and I'm going to slide that a little more towards the yellow, just a little bit. Magenta and green, I'm going to go a little bit more towards magenta, and then the cyan and red, I'm going to go a little more in the direction of the cyan, just a hair. That looks pretty good to me. And then the shadows tone, that is again a warm or cool tone in your shadows, midtones, and your highlights. Again, on any of these, if you want to reset them, you can just double click the little dot and it will reset them for you. I'm gonna tone my shadows a little cooler, midtones maybe a dash warmer, and highlights maybe just a hair warmer. Preserve exposure. Now what this does, if you have it slid all the way to the right, is it preserves the exposure of the image. If you slide that down all the way to the left, then when you play with your color head options, it tints the entire photo and can change the exposure. So most of the time I leave preserve exposure all the way up. I'm gonna go a little more towards magenta because it's a little bit too green for me. Film grain. This is where it gets fun. And in Dehancer, the film grain that is applied is not universal. It's not the same for each photo. It's not the same for each film stock. It's different. And the way it's applied is the software is actually looking at the photo and it's applying grain that makes sense for what was shot and what film stock was used. So size, pretty self-explanatory. You like gigantic grain, you can get gigantic grain. I am not really a massive fan of gigantic grain, so I usually don't touch this. I just leave it at 1. Sometimes I bump it up a little more if I want it to be a little bit more pronounced and grainy. The amount of grain, again, does exactly what you think. If you like lots of grain, have fun with that. I usually just leave it at around the 22-ish mark. The resolution of the grain. Now, high resolution grain, I like jacking that slider all the way up because then you get lots of detail still in your image, but also in the grain itself. Now, if you don't have a super fast computer, this can kind of slow things down. One thing I did really quickly forget to mention, when you select your film stock, there's an option over here on the left called push or pull, and this mirrors the effects of what happens to color negative or color positive film when you push or pull it. Pushing meaning develop longer, like leave in the development longer than the normal time you're supposed to, or pull is leave it in the chemicals for shorter, and that makes a difference on how the film turns out. With color negative film, it can affect the colors and the dynamic range. With color positive film, it's much more of a exposure difference. It's like overexposing or underexposing. I've been playing around and really enjoying the color negatives, and most of the time I end up pushing my photos. I'll push this one about a stop. 0.99 is close enough. If I pull it, it gets a green tint that I'm not really a fan of for this type of photo. Now back to the film grain. Resolutions all the way up. Shadows, midtones, and highlights. You can choose how much grain is in what area of the photos. I like having lots of grain in my shadows, a decent amount of grain in the midtones, and a little bit less in the highlights. So I like to balance those out, kind of in like a stair-step type thing. Now here's where all the other film emulations I've seen fall short. Halation. And boy, do Dehancer knock it out of the park with this one. I'm gonna enable that, and right away you should be able to see a difference, especially around her face. I'm gonna turn it off, and turn it on again. Turn it off, turn it on again. You see that difference? Oh, it's so good. It's just, I love it. Source limiter, I leave this all the way down because I don't want it to be limiting the sources that halation can come from. I like it showing up naturally where it would if I was shooting 35mm film. Local diffusion is how diffused do you want it. There's a little button in here called mask mode, which is really handy. If you turn that on, then you can see exactly what's happening in the areas that are being highlighted. It's a little bit creepy, if I'm honest, but it works. Global diffusion is exactly what local diffusion is, but on an entire image basis, not just the local areas where the halation is being applied. And then amplify is how strong do you want it? Do you want it ridiculously strong, like all the way up? Like, good Lord, look at that. That's a little much. Or do you want it basically not there at all? I usually just leave it where it's at, which is 40, but in this case, I think I'll pump it up a little bit because I like that look. I like the beat. And then bloom. Bloom is another fun thing of mine. I like bloom. I'm putting filters on my lenses all the time to try and get that bloomed effect. I like it. It lowers the contrast of the image by a good bit. But what can I say? I'm crazy and I like it. I will turn the diffusion and the amplification down a little bit though, because it's a little much. Again, this does have the same mask mode button that halation had, and it's very nice to be able to see exactly where your bloom is coming from. I'm gonna turn bloom off and turn it back on. Just makes things nice and soft, and I really like how that works. Vignette is another one that I like. I like vignettes. A lot of people I hear online is like, oh, vignetting is so last, decade or whatever, but shh, I like it, go away. I like a vignette I never go very extreme with this because honestly, it kind of just feels like it darkens my whole photo rather than just the edges, but like I'll go just a little bit, maybe half a stop. And then once you're done, you can come up to here where it says preview. You can turn it off to view your original image, turn it on to view the now film emulated, like the finished photo. I like this, so I'm gonna hit OK. It's gonna take me back to Lightroom, and here is my finished image. Now, they get put back into Lightroom as TIFF files, but still have plenty of flexibility, so I can play around with this if I want to in Lightroom. But most of the time, Dehancer is the last step that I do, and then I just export straight from Lightroom as essentially a 35mm film photo. That's what it looks like, that's how it feels, and I'm loving it. Paul from the future here really quick to talk about something that I think is really cool. For those of you who can't afford or don't have a full camera setup with bodies and lenses and you shoot a lot of your photos on your phone, Dehancer has you covered there. They've got an absolutely awesome app that I am very excited to show to you guys. So if I open it up here, you can shoot and capture images directly through the app, which is handy. But in this case, I've got some photos that I would like to bring in from my photo library, so I'm gonna do that. Now, once you get that in to the app, you have full access to all of the same settings in this app that are in the Lightroom plugin itself, and that's super awesome. So I'm just gonna whip up a photo in here really quick. Actually, yeah, give me Cinestill 800T. I like that one. Developer. Contrast boost, I am gonna bump the contrast up just a hair. And I'm gonna bump the color up just a hair as well. That looks great to me. Expand. Let's take the black point down a little bit and the white point up a little bit, just for a little bit more contrast. I like that. As for print, I usually just leave it on Kodak and Duraglossy paper, and I think I'm gonna do that. The color head, we'll go a little bit towards blue. We'll pull it a little over in the magenta direction and a little over in the cyan direction on the bottom there. Film grain, this is where it gets fun. 35mm ISO 500, I like that better. That'll up the amount of grain there. I'll increase it just a little bit more too on top of that. Halation, this is where it gets fun. 35mm, Super 35. Make that even more pronounced. I'm gonna turn it down just a little because it's a little bit much for me. Probably should have left it on the one that has the remjet coating on the back, but I didn't. Bloom, let's not go too crazy with this. Turn it up just a little bit. Vignette, I do love a good vignette, so we're gonna turn the exposure down just a little bit and turn the size down just a little. Then we go share, save to gallery. Bam, and that will be successfully now in my camera roll. If you shoot on your phone or you have things in your photo gallery on your phone that you're like, oh, this would look awesome with an actual like proper film emulation, go ahead and check out the Dehancer app. It's pretty sick. Anyway, back to your regularly scheduled programming. I gotta say, I love the look. I love the results. I love how easy it is. The only real gripe I have with Dehancer as a plugin is the fact that I feel like I have to reset all of my settings to scratch every time I bring in a new image. Maybe it's just me. That might not be an annoyance for everybody. In fact, some people might actually really enjoy it and be glad that it doesn't reset all your settings for you, but I personally find it kind of annoying. So that's my look at Dehancer for Lightroom, and it's great. It's great. It begins to actually scratch that itch that I've had for photography that feels real. I don't necessarily want my images to look good, I want them to look real. And this gets a little bit closer. It gets closer than I've ever gotten before to a look that I've been trying to trying to emulate, trying to find for the last, I think, 4 years at least. So I would definitely recommend, if you are interested in giving your photography some new life, if you're interested in an older, maybe more analog look to your photos, if you like the vibe and you like the feel and it makes you excited to go out and shoot again, if looking at the world through results like these makes you see things differently, I would recommend checking out Dehancer. It's unlike anything I've ever seen. So if you're interested in using Dehancer, I will put a link down below in the description. If you use the code STROPL at checkout, you can get 10% off of your purchase. Thank you to the folks over at Dehancer for collaborating with me on this video. You guys really have made something amazing, and I'm looking forward to using it a lot more. Ladies and gentlemen, hopefully you guys enjoyed. Again, put a link down below in the description if you want to check out Dehancer for yourself. Until next time, happy shooting, go out, be creative, and have fun. Bye guys.